Hey guys, what's up? My name is Zach, and today we're doing a 2020 election prediction between Richard Ojeda and Donald Trump. So Richard Ojeda, in case some of you don't know, he's the former congressional candidate from West Virginia. He also served as a West Virginia state senator, and he also served in the military, I believe, as a colonel or maybe a sergeant. But he has been in the news a lot lately, both in the 2018 election cycle and post 2018 election. He was in the 2018 election, featured in the news quite often, mainly because of his charisma, his energy, and just how energetic he is in general. And he's come to represent an anti-Trump bloc of people who once supported Trump and now no longer support him. And Richard Ojeda is definitely in that category, and that's been his main focus throughout his both 2018 election campaign and now his 2020 election campaign, since he is one of only two Democrats who has so far announced their candidacy in the 2020 election. And now let's get right into it. Let me just switch that color palette. So obviously it's a bit early for any Democrat to be announcing or anyone in general to be announcing their candidacy for the 2020 election. And whether or not Richard Ojeda's candidacy will last in terms of going into the actual 2020 election cycle, I don't know. Since, like I said, candidates who announce their candidacy this early on usually don't last very long once the actual election comes up. And as you can see, I've left a few states that are typically red no longer red, and this is because of Richard Ojeda's roots. He comes from West Virginia. Although in terms of political ideology, is a bit of an anomaly. He once supported Donald Trump, and he once was a Trump supporter during the 2016 election. However, he simultaneously supported Bernie Sanders for the Democratic primary during the 2016 election, and then voted for Trump over Hillary Clinton. So his past in terms of political ideology is a bit interesting. But currently he aligns mostly with the progressive movement, despite once being a Trump supporter, which again may sound a bit weird to some people, but that's his past. And his views have been pretty much down the line, moderate left to progressive for the most part, adopting quite a few of Bernie Sanders' views. He has been a very big advocate for medical marijuana use in West Virginia as well. But these states that are no longer filled in, these are states that currently do not have a great approval of Trump. And someone like Richard Ojeda, who represents the group of people who were once Trump supporters and are no longer Trump supporters, could very well grab on to those kinds of people. However, those states I'm going to fill in likely red across the line, just because even though Richard Ojeda could do significantly better in these states than your typical Democrat could, I don't believe that he would do good enough to make these states anywhere near leaning or anywhere near competitive between him and Trump, since these states are all for the most part still Trump country. Now going down over to not West Virginia, my bad, New Hampshire. I'm going to fill that in likely blue for virtually the same reasons that I filled in, and for Maine's 2 electoral votes, I'm going to fill that in likely blue as well, virtually for the same reason for why I filled in likely blue for almost any other Democrat. However, I think that Richard Ojeda's charisma and energy, anyone who's watched him speak knows what I'm referring to. He is certainly very, very energetic. He's a very good speaker, and he would do excellent on a debate stage with Trump. I think he would do better than any other Democrat in the 2020 running against Trump on a debate stage, just because of how fierce and how just energetic he is in general. And honestly, I don't think there's anyone else on the Democratic side who has nearly as much, who's been speculated for running for the 2020 presidency, who has anywhere near the energy and the just the energetic speaking ability that Richard Ojeda does, and that's certainly going to be something that's beneficial for him. And I think that will definitely do well in New Hampshire and in Maine at large. Now going over down to Virginia, likely blue, virtually for the same reasons I fill in likely blue for any other Democrat. New Mexico and Colorado, again, I'm not going to talk about these states very much since they tend to be likely blue for almost any Democrat, and Richard Ojeda as a Democrat wouldn't really change it that much, although, like I said before, speaking ability will definitely play a factor throughout the election as a whole. Now going down to Georgia, I'm going to fill it in likely for Trump, although Richard Ojeda could do very well in this state with his West Virginia roots. and his Democratic outsider background, I don't see the state being any more competitive for Richard Ojeda than it would be for any other Democrat. Just because I continue to believe that the only way for Democrats to secure Georgia is to have an African American moderate on the ticket, and we saw that with the gubernatorial election here. We had an African American woman who was a moderate in most positions running for the governorship, and she lost very narrowly, but she still lost. And that was the Democrats' best case scenario for this state in terms of a statewide election, having a African American woman with moderate left positions running, and she still lost. So I don't think that Richard Ojeda would have very much of a chance against Donald Trump. Going over to Minnesota, I'm going to fill this state in as likely blue for Richard Ojeda, which I pretty much would for any or for most decent Democrats running in the 2020 election. But Richard Ojeda, I think, would do very well throughout the Rust Belt as well, just because, like I said before, one, he's a Democratic outsider, and he's more of an outsider than someone like Bernie Sanders, and he's as much of an outsider as you can get in terms of a Democrat. Like, he is a maverick in every sense of the word. And if you guys, like I said, if you guys have watched him speak publicly or have read about him at all, this is abundantly clear. And that would do very well in the Rust Belt, along with his background, like I said, of being a former Trump supporter turned Trump protester. And that would do very well throughout the Rust Belt, I think. But there are some elements that Trump could implement that would make it not so effective, which I'll discuss later on. Going into Texas, I'm tempted to call it leaning, especially after seeing the results of the Senate race, which will play a role. The 2018 elections will play a role in how I call states in general, because that's a good indicator on where these states stand politically, or at least somewhat a good indicator. However, I'm going to fill it in likely, just because, as I said before, I think that Richard Ojeda would absolutely pull over a number of independents to his side. But I think that one big con to having Richard Ojeda on the ticket is his obscure background. People like to paint outsiders as being the best candidate and as being the best kind of candidate to have in a 2020 election, but there are some downsides. Because when you have someone who is strictly nonpartisan, like someone like Richard Ojeda, who his entire career, you can argue, is based around nonpartisanship and not playing towards the Democrats or playing towards the Republicans, when you have someone like that, you're going to have a lack of enthusiasm towards people who are partisan. And maybe that isn't a tremendous factor, considering that those people probably will vote for him no matter what, but there will be a lack of enthusiasm in terms of whether or not there'll be strong fundraising for him, whether or not there'll be strong canvassing for him as well. That's a big factor in having someone who is partisan, because someone who's partisan will get a lot of support from the base Democratic Party in terms of canvassing and in terms of volunteership. That'll be an issue with Richard Ojeda and for a number of political outsiders on either side in general. And I think that'll be a factor in why he won't do tremendously well, or not as well as he could do against Trump. Now going over to leaning states, I'm going to fill Maine's second in as leaning. Although I do think that Richard Ojeda will do very well in this district, I think that Trump still has a good hold on this northern part of the state. But with that said, Richard Ojeda definitely does represent the anti-Trump movement, or the formerly pro-Trump, now anti-Trump movement, and that definitely does represent that northern district very well, and I think that Richard Ojeda would secure that northern district in a hypothetical election. Moving over to Nevada, I'm going to fill it in leaning, and I think that what I was saying before with the lack of fundraising and a lack of party support on his side will play a factor in a state like Nevada. I think he will secure it, because I do think that his role as a political outsider and his background as a former Trump supporter turned anti-Trump politician will play a factor in why he would secure Nevada. However, I do think that Trump will take advantage of the lack of partisan support that Richard Ojeda would have, and it would become competitive in Nevada. And as we saw with the midterms as well, it was very competitive. The Senate race was the only exception, which Jackie... I'm blanking on the name, but with the Democratic Senate candidate, she did win by 5 points, which I thought was impressive considering how close that the polls were in that state. However, the governor's race was very slim, and I do think that the state will be close, probably below 10. Jackie Rose, that's the name I was thinking of, my bad. But I do think that the state will be close, just as close as it was during the midterms, and I think that will be a factor when you have someone like Richard Ojeda on the ticket. Going over to Pennsylvania, I do think that Richard Ojeda will secure this state, and this is mainly due to his background as a political outsider, and I do think that this state could move into a likely territory depending on how he campaigns. But as I said before, his lack of partisan support and his lack of partisan enthusiasm, which is a factor whenever you have someone who is not strictly partisan, will be a factor in why he won't do tremendously well in this state. However, I do think that he will do much better than a Hillary Clinton or an Elizabeth Warren type candidate who is strictly partisan. And in fact, I think a strictly partisan candidate will do far worse than a political outsider like Richard Ojeda or Bernie Sanders, which is why I would call Pennsylvania leaning in this column. Going over to Michigan, basically the same logic. I do think that he will secure a number of independents with his charisma and with his political background as well. But I do think that lack of partisan support will be a factor, just like it would be a factor in Pennsylvania. Going over to North Carolina, I will call this state leaning in Trump's column. I do think that regionalism, because of the fact that he's from West Virginia and he will appeal to some degree to Southern voters, I do think that this state still is in Trump's column in terms of approval and in terms of just general partisanship. And like I said before, his lack of partisan enthusiasm will be a factor in North Carolina. And it will become competitive. I do think that Richard Ojeda would be a great candidate for a state like North Carolina, but in the end, I think that the Republican base here will hold out, and Trump will hold it against someone like Richard Ojeda. Moving up to Wisconsin, I'm going to call this state leaning in Richard Ojeda's column, virtually for the same reason I call the rest of the Rust Belt in Richard Ojeda's column. I do think that he will secure that anti-Trump independent vote in Wisconsin, which is key in winning the Rust Belt in general. And I do think that he will hold the state despite his lack of partisan support, which isn't a tremendous factor in Wisconsin especially. Moving over, I forgot to call Nebraska's first, which I'll call likely, virtually for the same reason as I called the rest of these likely states likely for Trump. But that second district I'm going to call leaning for Richard Ojeda, and this is because I do think that he will do very, very well throughout the Midwest, because the Midwest, especially in states like Nebraska and Montana and Kansas, as you can see here, has been strongly characterized by strong Trump skepticism. I say Trump skepticism and not strong Trump opposition, because it's not opposition. I forgot to fill in Illinois as well. Jeez, my bad. And that does put him over the top with 280 electoral votes. But his approval is below 10% in a few of these states and has been throughout the course of the year. And this is because these are more typical establishment Republicans who are not tremendously enthusiastic about someone like Trump. And Richard Ojeda would definitely take advantage of that kind of split, as you can see with the shading for Montana, Kansas, and Nebraska's first. However, I think for Nebraska's second, that will flip to him as a combination that this is the most competitive part of the red wall, and the fact that Richard Ojeda would definitely do better than most Democrats throughout the red wall, which would push this into his column. Going over to Florida, again, I think that Southern appeal will be a factor for Richard Ojeda, but I think that that lack of partisan enthusiasm will also be a factor, and that lack of fundraising as well will be a factor in addition. And I think it will be close. I think it will be pretty close. But the midterms did show that this state still has Republican tendencies, despite the fact that the rest of the nation is moving blue, and that is going to be a big factor for Democrats. Democrats are going to have to fight really hard in order to move Florida into their column, because it's going to be difficult. Just looking at the midterms, the fact that both Bill Nelson and Andrew Gillum, both Democrats favored to win in these races, both lost by narrow margins, but they still lost in these races, should be a huge, huge warning sign for Democrats. And I think that in the end, Richard Ojeda will not be able to secure that Democratic support across the board, and I think it will go to Trump. And I'm going to continue to call it in Trump's column in general for more Democrats than usual, considering the results of the midterms. Now going over to Arizona, I do think that Richard Ojeda will do very well in Arizona, considering his background, the fact that Arizona is made up of moderates who do not support Trump. But I do think that his views and his populist approach will turn off a number of moderate voters, and that'll be a big con for him as well, because Richard Ojeda is, in every sense of the word, a populist on the Democratic side, and that kind of populist, extreme, anger-driven politics will turn off a number of moderates, especially moderate Republicans, and that will be the case for Arizona and why it would go to Trump. Moving over to Ohio, this is a tough state to call, but I will call it for Richard Ojeda, and this is a big factor will be regionalism. The fact that he is from West Virginia and he will be able to appeal to those more solid Republican parts of the state. And once you consider the cities coming in, and then the more typically blue states, or more typically blue areas of Ohio, I do believe he will secure those areas. And I think that his populist approach will do well for him in a state like Ohio, where a number of former Trump supporters, which carried the state for him in 2016, no longer support him as fervently as they did in 2016. I think that he will secure a large number of those types of independents and those types of Republicans as well, and I do believe that will lead him to victory in Ohio. Moving over to Iowa, I think that this state will go to Richard Ojeda, and I think that it will go to him as a result of his Midwestern support, of his Midwestern appeal, and his appeal to independent anti-Trump voters as well. I think that he will secure a huge block of those kinds of voters throughout the country, and I think that will be a huge factor in a state like Iowa, which is characterized by that kind of Trump skepticism I was talking about with the Midwest. All right, so this is the electoral map. In general, I think that Richard Ojeda would be, if nominated, a very good candidate, but you got to consider the fact that it's not a very big possibility that he will be nominated. It's not a huge possibility that he'll even last into the debates and into the main primary stages of the 2020 election, because I don't think that he has the support within the Democratic Party to last. I don't think that even if his campaign continues into the primaries, I think that he will be. I do not think he will last in the primaries. I think that people like Bernie Sanders, like Joe Biden, Kamala Harris even will really pull apart his main base, and will make it very difficult for him to be nominated. But if he was nominated and he had the full backing of the financial, and the endorsements of a Democratic presidential nominee, he would do very well. But that likelihood in of itself is very, very small. So just take that in consideration when looking at this electoral map. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This is my first video I've made after, I think, almost a month. I've been very busy with school. I've been very busy with my life in general. But I do hope to make videos more regularly, and I do hope to get back on track with my formerly regular schedule. The end of the midterms really did leave me off on kind of what I felt a break, but I do regret taking as long as I did to make a video. But I do hope to continue on the same schedule as I did before. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. It's the only way for small channels like mine to grow, and I hope you guys have a good day. See ya.